Jesus, as we've looked at over the last 10 or 12, I'm not even sure what number I'm on at this point in the series, but as he's walked this journey with the disciples, and as we've looked at what it means to be a disciple and to make disciples, we see that Jesus took every single opportunity that he had to teach his disciples what it meant to be disciples. And he showed them, I love the fact that Jesus showed them the very hardest parts of it. He didn't water it down or try and sugarcoat it. He said to them, this is what it's all about. And there were times when he had to share very difficult things with them. And I love that. I love the fact that he was honest with them. But at the same time, he always showed them the joy and the peace and the victory that would come with it as well. And he used every opportunity to teach them. And he explained so beautifully this new life that the disciples would have. On one occasion, Jesus said to his disciples that no one can have two masters. You can't physically do that. And I love the logic of the statement. I love the analogies that Jesus used when he was talking to the disciples. And the logic of this statement, you just simply cannot have two masters. You cannot serve two masters at the same time. And we see this with our dog Apple, as most of you know, Apple, because I've talked about her before. We see it all the time. If Alex and I are both calling her at the same time, well, you can't have two masters, right? You can't. It's impossible. You can't just split into two and try and follow both. It's physically impossible for anyone or anything to have two masters. And so what will normally happen if we're both calling her is that she'll probably go to Alex. That's probably what will happen in that case. But if I have food, well, then that's a different story. Then the master changes at that point in time. But if we both have food, then it's just chaos. Back and forth. Who do I go to? What am I going to do? Go here. Tail wagging, just going crazy, not quite sure exactly what to do. And I think for a lot of the time as Christians, it looks a bit like that for us. We've been called out of sin and out of the old. The new has come. But that master is still there calling, and sometimes it draws us, and we're kind of a bit like, well, where do I go and what I do? And the reality is that we cannot have two masters. At any one point in your walk, in this journey of life, you will only be serving one master at any one point. That's the logical fact. You can only be serving one at any point in time. And in our text that we're going to have a look at today, Jesus starts off by saying to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, and then he goes on to give us an idea of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. But if I could summarize this passage into one sentence, if I had to do that, if I was forced to do that, I'd probably say that it would sound something like this. If any of you wants to be my follower, get over yourself. And that's what I want to speak about this morning. Because we cannot have two masters. We've either got to serve him or we serve ourselves. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must turn from your selfish ways. That's getting over yourself. Some versions say deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? For the Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father and will judge all people according to their deeds. And I tell you the truth, some standing here right now will not die before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I thought this morning, just to help us understand the reality of what we're talking about, I thought I'd put a sort of a visual aid here of the two masters. So on the one hand, over here, we've got self. This is you sitting in the chair, all right? And I know some of you are thinking, I think that's a bit insulting to look at myself like a teddy bear. Other of you thinking, that's so cute. And I think that's pretty cool. Okay, whatever. Whatever it is, but this is representing you this morning. And on the other side, we have the cross as representing Christ. So we have the two masters, all right? And just to give us an idea of what it's all about, we can only serve one. Now, our default or our natural human tendency, or the flesh, as Paul often called it, is to go towards self. It seems to be the default that we have. And if you go all the way back to the Garden of Eden, you look at the first sin, you'll see that the first sin was incredibly selfish. It was self-centered. I want to know everything that God knows, and I want to be powerful, and I want this. And it was selfish. And since then, all of us have been born into Adam and born into that sin, and we've inherited that sin. It's kind of like spiritual genetics. The Bible talks about this all the time. It's a very important theological fact that we are born into sin. We're born into Adam, and we inherit that. We inherit his spiritual genes, if you want to put it like that. And it's a problem for us, because from the moment we draw breath, we have this problem of selfishness, and we have this problem of sin. If you have a look at a baby, no one teaches a baby to do something wrong, or a child to do something wrong, and yet it does it. Even just think of a baby crying. Of course, we're happy that the baby cries, because then we know we've got to feed it, and we've got to do all that, and surviving. But after a while, we realize, you know what, this child is learning that when it wants something, it just makes a fuss. He or she. They just make a fuss, and they get what they want. And so from a very young age, no one teaches them, we realize that if we put up a fuss and if we do certain things, we'll get what we want because we are selfish. And so we are naturally drawn. It might look cute and it might look nice and everything else, but we're drawn to being selfish and to being sinful. It's a very strong master. But the good news is that when we give our lives to God, when we become a Christian, we use the term born again. We are born into Christ. And so we have a new master. And that is just a wonderful truth. And it's a wonderful way of putting it, born again, because we literally get to start life again on a spiritual level. And so even though the old master still calls loudly for our attention, and for some of us we've probably even experienced the old master calling us this morning rather loudly, still does that, but we have a choice not to follow that master anymore. We have a choice not to live for ourselves anymore. We have that choice. And this is where basically Jesus defines the life of a disciple in this particular passage in terms of ditching the old and in with the new. He defines it. He says this is what it means to be a disciple, is you've actually got to deny and get rid of and no longer follow the old master and follow the new. And he defines it like that. And if he defines it like that, it means it's important for us. It means it's a very crucial part of what it means to follow him. So let's start with the old master. Let's start with self. We live in a world where putting yourself first is becoming more and more natural, isn't it? I mean, these days selfies. I was conducting a wedding last year, and the master of ceremony said, please, before the wedding, just announce no selfie sticks during the ceremony. I was like, what? Really? No, please no. The photographer said they get in the way of all the no selfie sticks during the ceremony. I mean, can you imagine at a wedding where the focus is probably supposed to be the bride and the groom and what's happening there? Hey, I'm at a wedding. We live in a world where just putting yourself there, it's promoted. I was watching on Twitter Nando's advert last week. It's a new Nando's advert. And there's this lady there who's at Nando's, and she's so enjoying the meal that she forgets to take her selfie. And everyone is like, what happened to her? Where's she gone? I don't know I'm worried about. People are phoning. What's happening? Because she's just enjoying her Nando's meal. I understand that so much. We live in a world where self-centeredness is just there all the time. So not only is it natural for us to be pulled towards this tendency, but we're living in a world that promotes it. It's very, very difficult at times to get out of that mindset. And the idea of living and serving something other than oneself is out of place in this world. But make no mistake of it, serving oneself is ironically self-destructive. Isn't it amazing? Think about that for a moment. You're serving yourself. You want the best for yourself. You're only thinking about yourself. But at the end of the day, it's self-destructive. If you think of any sin you like, I did this experiment and I just thought of a whole bunch of different things. Think of any sin, you will see selfishness in that sin. Anything, any kind of sin, you will see selfishness in there. It's there. And the Bible teaches us, and in fact, even if you didn't know anything about the Bible, even if you didn't understand anything of the Bible, you'd have to say that this is true. It says that the wages of sin is death. And even, as I say, even if you weren't a Christian, even if you weren't following God, you'd have to agree that when people do wrong things, and you might define it by in your own ways what is wrong exactly, but if people do wrong things or bad things, it leads to death. It leads to destruction. It leads to hopelessness. It leads to chaos. It is destructive. And there in the midst of sin is selfishness. And so selfishness is self-destructive. So what is the solution? Jesus says you must turn from your selfish ways. And I think the translation we know better is to deny yourself. The words I used, get over yourself. And it sounds kind of harsh and hard. But you know what? That is part of what it means to be a Christian. It's just getting over ourselves. I've got to learn that every day. I've got to just get over myself because that's not what I'm here for. The Greek word here means to disown. It's an even stronger word, or to abstain. Those are strong English words. I want to abstain from myself. I want to disown myself. And it really puts it in a very strong way. It's not a case of saying, you know what, I'm just going to take a break from being selfish today. No. It's about saying, listen, whenever this master comes and rears its ugly head and starts putting pressure on me, I want to disown it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want to have anything to do with living for self. And I'll say that the living like this is different. And it should be. Because when people look at the life of a believer, they should see a totally different life. And so that's why we use terminology like being born again, because it's so different. And we have to say this cannot be described in what was there before. It's a whole new thing. And living like this means that we take up our cross. It says, deny yourself and take up your cross. And I want to have a look at that this morning. I want to meditate on that this morning, what it means to take up our cross. You know, there's so many applications to this verse. And I've heard many, many different applications, and they're all important. But today I want to focus on a few. Just a few things this morning that I believe is really significant as we choose to say, you know what, I don't want to follow this master anymore. I want to take up my cross. I want to associate with the cross. And it seems weird, you know, that's what we're naturally drawn to. I want to look after myself and everything else. And the cross, you know, that's pain and that's suffering that happened there. And it seems weird almost to the world. And it certainly would have been even weirder in the days of the early church to associate oneself with the cross. But there are a number of things that it means. And the first is that it means that when we take up the cross, we take up a new life. We need to remember that all the time as we follow Jesus. That we take up this new life. It's been a bit hot, as all of you know, and I'm actually kind of looking forward to some cooler weather coming up. But one of the things I'm not a fan of in sort of inland climate with the winter is that everything just dies. You know what I mean? It just gets dusty and dead, and really everything just dies, and it doesn't look really nice. You see that death all around you, you know, and you see the withering and so on. And it doesn't look very nice. And then after a while, whatever still might be alive there gets burnt because you get those fires. And I'm talking about all those fires, everything gets burnt up. But what I really love is when the rains start falling again and you just see that green grass coming up amongst the ashes. That's beautiful. And that is what it is for us. That we have to say, you know what, I want this to be put to death. And I want to live in this. That out of that death comes a new life. That's what it's all about. We live in a new life. And Paul often said, and I want to say it again this morning, why then would we want to live in the old? Imperfect, sinful, frustrated life when we have a new life. Why? I want to ask you this morning, would anybody here want to hang out with a corpse? I know that's putting it in a very... But we wouldn't. But spiritually speaking, we do. Because we have new life. But we hang out with the old. Why do we let death in when it has been defeated? We don't need death in our homes, in our lives. God has given you new life. And so part of what it means to take up the cross is saying every single day, I want to embrace a new way of living. I want to embrace a new spiritual reality. I want to embrace hope, and I want to embrace peace, and I want to embrace the power of God in this new life that simply cannot be my own because it's so completely different. That is what it means. And so there's something amazing about living and identifying closely with the cross as we follow Jesus, that we embrace this new life. Second thing that we embrace when we take hold of the cross is we also take hold of victory. You know, the cross is victory for us. The devil thought he'd won. And sometimes, even in this day and age, the enemy behaves as though it is won. And people behave as though there's hopelessness and there's no hope in this world. And on that day when Jesus hung on that cross, the enemy celebrated and jeered at him because they thought that they'd won. But as Jesus breathed his last breath, the victory was ours. And he crushed the serpent's head. Isn't that amazing? That is the victory that we celebrate. That is the victory that we talk about every time we talk about Jesus and how he died on the cross. But it should be more than just talking about it. We should be living it. We should be taking hope in this victory every single day. I was talking a little bit about this with the kids at Kick on Friday. And just about the victory that we have in Christ. And I said, you guys are taught that you must always be good sports, right? And all of us would say, yeah, we must be good sports. Well, this is the one time I reckon you can be a bad sport. Tell them they lost. Tell the enemy he's lost. Because the devil is out there trying to sow lies and deceit and hopelessness when the victory has been won. And I sometimes wonder then, why do we live as Christians defeated? Why do we live defeated when the enemy has been defeated? If the victory's already been won, then I want to say to you this morning, no matter what you're going through, nothing big or small, nothing in this world can take you away from the victory that we have in Christ, in the love of God. Nothing. That is an amazing reality. At the cross, there is this hope. There is this life. There is this amazing peace that we have, that we can live in. And I want to say to you this morning that if we are living in victory and if we are living in hope and if we believe that no matter what, we have the victory, if that is the case, then we can take courage in trial. We can. We don't get taken out of trial all the time. We have to face it. But if we have the victory, we can take courage in trial. And that's part of what it means to take up the cross, is to take courage in those times of trial. Because in a very real sense, we do also carry the cross. And just as it was a burden for Jesus, at times it is a burden for us as we live in the hardships and the struggles and the trouble in this world. And Jesus said, you know what? He didn't say, hey, you follow me, you're not going to have trouble. He said, in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, because I have overcome the world. That is such an amazing reality. People always watch Christians closer when there's trouble. You stand out there and you tell the world and you tell your friends and you tell everyone else out there, I'm a Christian and I follow God. Believe me, when you have trouble, and sometimes people will even give you trouble just to see how you'll respond in that moment. And people watch, and I want to say to you this morning that there will never be a bigger opportunity in your life to boast in God and to show others how powerful God is and how strong God is than in the midst of your greatest trial. There'll never be a bigger opportunity than in the midst of your hardest moment. That is when you have the opportunity to shout out the loudest, this is my God. Even though I'm struggling, and even though it's painful, and even though right now it's really hard to see and trust God, I'm going to serve you and I'm going to follow you anyway. Now, it doesn't mean that we should seek after trouble and seek after hardship and look for those things. By all means, enjoy the blessings of God and the times of peace. But it does mean that in those moments when we're struggling, we say, you know what, even in this moment, self and sin and the world, that is not my master anymore. Jesus Christ is my master. And even in this moment, I want to hang on to you, and I want to hang on to your word, and I want to hang on to the cross, even in my trial. I don't know about you, but in those moments, those are the times when self really knocks at the door. Those are the times when I feel like saying to God, you owe me something. Why are you letting me go through this? You owe me. Why are you doing this? How can you do this? We behave like the older brother in the prodigal son. You guys know that story of the prodigal son? We know the prodigal son so well, but we don't know the older brother so much. That older brother, things going wrong for him. Not happy with life. What does he do? God, okay, it's the father, but he represents God. Father, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing this to happen? We get upset. We complain. Self creeps in. It's in those moments where it's really tough. But it's in those moments where we have such a voice to speak out in the midst of trial. I want to say to you this morning, God doesn't owe you anything. He's already given you his all. He's already given you his life. It's yours. It's there. It's already there for you. Just have to take hold of it. Just have to choose to follow him. Deny yourself. Take up your cross and follow me. Last week was an amazing time as we gathered together. For those of you who went here last week, we really had a special time, and God moved in an incredible way in this place as we heard his word. And many of us took a step closer in our relationship to God. Many of us took a stand and said, you know what? I'm not happy with where I am. I want to be in a different place with God. I want to be in a closer place, a more intimate place with God. And that was an incredible time last week. And we asked ourselves the question, do we really know him? We know about him, but do we really, really know him? And a great desire burned in our hearts to get real with him and to know him more. And so on this last part, on following Jesus and on being intimate with him, I feel like we've said a lot of it last week, and I'm not going to say much on this point today. I would encourage you, if you weren't here, go and have a listen on YouTube, download it on Slack, have a listen to what we talked about last week, because it was a really powerful time. But I will say this one thing on following Jesus. The desire may be there and the hope may be there, but one of the greatest obstacles that will get in the way of you following him is you. It's one of the biggest obstacles. And we need to actually, and I wanted to visualize it this morning. I wanted us to see it sitting here this morning, because we need to realize that it's a problem. It gets in the way of following him. So I want to say to you this morning, trust him and know that what he has for you is better than what you could ever have for yourself. If we follow ourselves, that's self-destructive. But we have to trust and hope in him that what he has really is better.